Thought well. I mean, he was very smart about his defenses. I think he approaches the game as trying to dissect his opponents and try to find weaknesses or try to force them to do things that they didn't feel comfortable doing. And he introduced certain tricks to make me expand on my talents as an offensive player. I mean, that's why I consider him the best.
Michael Jordan spent most of his career measuring himself against greatness, but there was another group he paid attention to. Players who didn't get headlines, didn't get campaigns built around them, and didn't get mentioned enough when people talked about winning basketball. Jordan noticed those players because they showed up in the margins of the game. They were the guys who defended the second action, who made the right read instead of the loud play, who didn't change how they played when the moment got big. Some of them never made all NBA teams. Some were buried behind bigger names. Some were remembered as role players, even though Jordan knew better. Because when you're on the floor against the best player ever, reputation disappears fast. Only effectiveness remains. And these 5 players, they had Jordan's attention long before they had the public's. These are the 5 players Michael Jordan believed were underrated. But before proceeding, please take a second and subscribe and like this video. It will be very motivation for us. Sidney Moncrief is one of the clearest examples of how impact can outpace reputation. When Moncrief entered the league in 1977, he joined a Milwaukee Bucks team that was transitioning out of the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar era. There was no superstar infrastructure around him, no national spotlight, and no marketing push. What followed was a career built almost entirely on performance, especially on defense, where Moncrief set standards that still hold up today. Moncrief was a 5-time All-Star, a 5-time All-NBA selection, and most importantly, the first player in NBA history to win Defensive Player of the Year, which he did twice, 1983 and 1984. That matters because the award didn't exist until 1983, and when it did, Moncrief immediately defined what elite perimeter defense looked like. At his peak, Moncrief wasn't just a stopper, he was a complete two-way guard. From 1982 to 1986, he averaged roughly 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game, while consistently taking on the toughest perimeter assignment every night. That combination was rare in any era, but especially in the 1980s, when guards were either scorers or defenders, rarely both at a high level. This is where Michael Jordan enters the picture. Jordan has repeatedly pointed to Moncrief as one of the toughest defenders he ever faced. Not because Moncrief shut him down completely, few players ever did, but because he forced Jordan to work for everything. Moncrief defended with positioning, anticipation, and strength. He didn't gamble. He didn't foul unnecessarily. He stayed attached through cuts, recovered quickly, and forced scorers into uncomfortable shots. Jordan once described Moncrief as the best defender I ever faced, a statement that carries weight considering the era Jordan played in. This wasn't about reputation, it was about execution. Moncrief could guard without help, which allowed his teams to stay disciplined defensively, something Jordan always respected. In the playoffs, Moncrief's value became even clearer. During the early to mid-1980s, the Bucks were one of the most consistent teams in the Eastern Conference, regularly winning 50 or more games. They reached the Eastern Conference Finals in 1983 and 1984, often running into Larry Bird's Celtics or Julius Erving's 76ers. Milwaukee didn't always advance, but Moncrief was rarely the weak point. He guarded top scorers, carried offensive responsibility, and maintained efficiency in slower, more physical postseason basketball. Despite all of this, Moncrief's name is often missing from conversations about great guards of the era. Part of that is timing. He peaked at the same time as Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and later Jordan himself. Another factor is market visibility. Milwaukee didn't dominate headlines, and Moncrief wasn't flashy. His game was built on balance, control, and repetition, traits that age well analytically, but didn't sell highlights. There's also the defensive bias. Perimeter defense rarely defines legacy unless it's paired with championships or viral moments. Moncrief didn't have either. What he had was sustained excellence. Year after year, he defended the league's best players, scored efficiently, and anchored winning teams. From a modern perspective, his impact looks even stronger. Two-way guards who can score 20 a night, defend elite wings, and anchor team defense are now considered premium assets. In Moncrief's time, that value was understood by players, especially opponents, even if it wasn't fully captured by media narratives. Sidney Moncrief wasn't overlooked because he lacked achievement. He was overlooked because his value lived in consistency, not spectacle. And for players like Michael Jordan, that kind of value was impossible to miss. Joe Dumars' reputation has always lagged behind his responsibility. When people talk about the Detroit Pistons of the late 1980s and early 1990s, the focus usually lands on Isaiah Thomas, or the team's physical identity. What often gets lost is how central Dumars was to making that team work, especially against elite perimeter scorers. Dumars wasn't a specialist, he was a stabilizer. From the moment he entered the league in 1985, Dumars took on one of the hardest jobs in basketball, defending the opposing team's best guard while still carrying offensive responsibility. At his peak, he was a 6-time All-Star, a 5-time All-NBA selection, and a 4-time All-Defensive Team player. Those honors didn't come from volume scoring. They came from trust. Detroit trusted Dumars with the toughest assignments. Against Michael Jordan, Dumars was often the primary defender in key stretches, especially late in games. While the Jordan rules were a team concept, Dumars was the perimeter anchor who executed them cleanly. He stayed disciplined, used angles instead of fouls, and forced Jordan into contested shots without constantly sending him to the free throw line. That kind of defense required patience and control, traits Jordan has consistently acknowledged. Jordan has spoken about Dumars as one of the smartest defenders he faced, not the loudest, not the most physical, the smartest. Dumars understood tendencies, spacing, and timing. He didn't gamble for steals. He didn't overplay passing lanes. He stayed connected and trusted, helped defense behind him. That mattered in the playoffs. During Detroit's championship runs in 1989 and 1990, Dumars averaged around 17 points per game while guarding elite scorers on the other end. In the 1989 NBA Finals, he was named Finals MVP, averaging 27.3 points per game against the Los Angeles Lakers. That performance wasn't about hot shooting alone, it was about balance, scoring efficiently while maintaining defensive structure. Even then, Dumars rarely received star treatment. He didn't dominate the ball, he didn't control tempo, he filled gaps. That made him essential to winning, but less visible in individual narratives. There's also a stylistic reason his impact is often underestimated. Dumars played with restraint. He rarely forced shots. He rarely reacted emotionally. His game was built around making the correct play repeatedly. In an era remembered for excess, physicality, confrontation, and personality, Dumars stood out by not standing out. That restraint is why his value shows up most clearly in hindsight. Modern analysis favors players who can defend without fouling, score efficiently, and function within structure. Dumars did all three at a high level. He didn't bend games to his will the way superstars did. He made sure games didn't break. Jordan noticed that, not because Dumars stopped him entirely, no one did, but because Dumars forced execution. There were no shortcuts, no careless possessions. Every basket had to be earned within Detroit's system. Joe Dumars wasn't overlooked because he lacked moments. He was overlooked because his game was about control, not attention, and control is easiest to recognize if you're the one trying to score against it.
He thought well. I mean, he was very smart about his defenses. I think he approaches the game as trying to dissect his opponents and try to find weaknesses or try to force them to do things that they didn't feel comfortable doing, and he introduced certain tricks to make me, expand on my talents as an offensive player. I mean, that's why I consider him the best.
Bernard King's career is one of the clearest cases where dominance was real, but visibility was fleeting. When King was healthy, he wasn't just a scorer. He was one of the most efficient, physically imposing wings in the league. At his peak with the New York Knicks, he combined strength, balance, and touch in a way few defenders could deal with. He didn't rely on speed. He created space with footwork, used his frame to finish through contact, and punished switches in the mid-post. The numbers back it up. In the 1984-85 season, King averaged 32.9 points per game, winning the scoring title on elite efficiency for a wing in that era. In the 1984 playoffs, he elevated even further, 34.8 points per game against Detroit, including 44 points in Game 5 and 46 in Game 3. Those weren't empty performances. They came against a defense that was already becoming one of the league's most physical units. That stretch forced the league to take notice, including Michael Jordan. Jordan entered the NBA the following season, and while their primes barely overlapped, King quickly earned respect among players for how he scored. He didn't hunt fouls. He didn't need volume dribbles. He got to his spots early in the clock and finished plays cleanly. For defenders, that was frustrating. There was no obvious adjustment to make. King's game translated directly to playoff basketball. Slower pace didn't hurt him. Physicality didn't knock him off balance. He could score from either wing, the elbow, or the low block, and he rarely rushed shots. That versatility made him difficult to scheme against, a trait elite scorers value when evaluating each other. What ultimately muted King's reputation wasn't performance, it was timing and health. In 1985, he he suffered a catastrophic knee injury that cost him nearly 2 full seasons. When he returned, he was still productive, averaging over 20 points per game again, but the explosion and momentum of his peak were gone. The league had moved on to new faces, and King's best years were compressed into a short window many fans never fully processed. There's also a market and narrative factor. King's most dominant years came on Knicks teams that weren't championship contenders. Without deep playoff runs or a final stage, his scoring didn't become part of the league's long-term memory the way it did for players attached to dynasties. Among players, though, the evaluation was different. Scorers respected King because his production wasn't built on volume alone. It was built on strength, patience, and efficiency. He didn't need a system to create advantages. He created them himself. In modern terms, Bernard King looks like a prototype, a strong wing who scores efficiently without dominating the ball. That profile is celebrated now. In the mid-1980s, it was easier to overlook once injuries intervened. Bernard King wasn't forgotten because he lacked greatness. He was forgotten because his peak was brief and brutally real. Mark Price's impact was easy to miss if you only looked at size or volume scoring. He wasn't explosive, he wasn't physical, and he didn't dominate possessions the way star guards often did. What he did instead was control games quietly, with shooting, decision-making, and efficiency that forced defenses to make uncomfortable choices. Price became the engine of the Cleveland Cavaliers during the late 1980s and early 1990s, turning them into a consistent playoff team in the Eastern Conference. From 1989 to 1993, Cleveland won at least 50 games 3 times, and Price was the constant. He averaged around 18 points and 8 assists at his peak, while shooting at elite levels from everywhere on the floor. The shooting numbers still stand out. Price was one of the original members of the 50-40-90 club, a benchmark that didn't carry the same media weight then as it does now. He wasn't just accurate, he was efficient under pressure. His pull-up jumper off the pick and roll was automatic, and his free throw shooting punished teams late in games when fouling guards became a necessity. That's where Michael Jordan's perspective matters. Jordan respected guards who made correct reads and didn't waste possessions. Price fit that profile. He ran Cleveland's offense with patience, rarely forced shots, and consistently made defenses pay for small mistakes. Against aggressive defenses like Chicago's, that kind of discipline was dangerous. You couldn't leave him, you couldn't go under screens, and trapping him often created advantages elsewhere. In the playoffs, Price's value didn't disappear. Cleveland pushed Chicago repeatedly, most famously in 1989, when the Cavaliers won 57 games and took the Bulls to 5 games in the first round, a series remembered for the shot, but built on Price's orchestration throughout. Even in losses, Cleveland's offense functioned because Price kept it organized. What limited Price's broader reputation wasn't effectiveness, it was context. He played in a smaller market, without a dominant front-court star, and in an era that favored physical guards and isolation scoring. His game was about precision. That didn't always translate into highlights, but it translated into wins. Injuries also shortened his peak. By the mid-1990s, his body couldn't hold up, and his role diminished quickly. Without a long prime or deep playoff runs, his resume never fully entered mainstream conversations about elite guards of the era. Among players, though, the evaluation was sharper. Guards knew that Price's shooting changed coverage. Big men knew his passing punished hedges. Coaches trusted him because he didn't break structure. That combination made him far more dangerous than his reputation suggested. Mark Price didn't overwhelm opponents. He pressured them with accuracy, patience, and decisions. The kind of impact that doesn't shout, but steadily tilts games in your favor. Alex English's production was impossible to ignore, even if his reputation often lagged behind it. From the early 1980s through the end of the decade, English was one of the most consistent scorers in the league. Between 1981 and 1989, he averaged over 25 points per game, and for the entire decade of the 1980s, no player scored more total points than Alex English. Not Michael Jordan, not Larry Bird, not Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. English led the NBA in total scoring during that span. Yet his name rarely comes up first when people talk about dominant scorers of the era. English built his career with the Denver Nuggets, a team defined by pace and offense under Doug Moe. The Nuggets played fast, spread the floor, and emphasized movement. English thrived in that system, but his scoring wasn't system-dependent. He scored from everywhere: mid-post, baseline cuts, transition, and face-up jumpers, often without needing the ball to stick. What separated English from many high-volume scorers was efficiency. He didn't force a shot. He didn't dominate possessions. His game was smooth, deliberate, and repeatable. Defenders rarely felt overwhelmed until they checked the scoreboard and realized he had 28 points without drama. That quiet accumulation mattered to opposing stars. Michael Jordan has spoken about players who could score without obvious weaknesses, and English fit that category. He didn't rely on speed or brute strength. He used angles, timing, and touch that made him difficult to scheme against. You couldn't simply take away one move. He adjusted naturally within the flow of the game. In the playoffs, English remained productive. He averaged over 25 points per game across multiple postseason runs, including deep trips in the mid-1980s when Denver consistently ranked among the West's top teams. While the Nuggets didn't reach the finals, English was rarely the limiting factor. He scored against physical defenses, maintained efficiency at slower tempos, and continued to produce without needing isolation-heavy sets. So, why does his reputation trail his resume? Part of it is environment. Denver's high-scoring style caused critics to label his numbers as inflated, even though his efficiency stayed strong regardless of opponent. Another factor is timing. English peaked as the league's attention focused on flashier personalities and dynasties in larger markets. His calm demeanor and team-first approach didn't invite narrative. There's also the absence of a defining moment. No final stage. No signature playoff series etched into highlight history. English's greatness lived in accumulation, not spikes. Among players, though, the evaluation was clearer. Scorers respected English because his game translated anywhere. He didn't need whistles. He didn't need plays built for him. He simply found space and converted it. From a modern perspective, his profile reads differently. A wing who scores efficiently, moves without the ball, and maintains production year after year is now recognized as foundational. In the 1980s, that kind of value was easier to take for granted. Alex English didn't lack dominance. He lacked noise. And for a decade, while louder stars drew attention, English quietly did more scoring than anyone else in the league, a reality that still surprises people who didn't have to guard him. And that's the pattern with players like Alex English. The impact was real, the production was constant, but the conversation never quite caught up. Now, flip that perspective. If this video was about players whose value didn't get enough credit, the next one is about the opposite. The players Larry Bird never warmed up to, no matter how talented they were. Click into Larry Bird names 5 players he never respected, and see how Bird drew the line between competition he valued and styles he never bought into.